we find ourselves in the same predicament. Israel, once again, did evil in the eyes of the Lord now that Ehud was dead. We know that the judge's cycle shows that after the judge dies, Israel does the same thing again, and then the cycle happens all over again. Israel has given itself away for idolatry and for disobedience. And so God, as a faithful father would do, disciplines them in a way they will understand. That is, oppression from the Canaanite nations, as God had promised them if they would reject him. We wonder how Israel can continually fall into these same patterns over and over again. We wish they would see their foolishness, and it's like a cliched action movie, Indiana Jones, like a kid's adventure movie, and there is this expendable, if you like sci-fi, red-shirted minion moving stealthily and slowly towards some amazing trinket, some beautiful prize that they have been seeking. The lights dim. It feels like doom's tendrils are closing in around them, and they reach slowly for that prize. They reach slowly, millimeter by millimeter forward, and we're like, don't do it! Don't do it, it's a trap. We know it's a trap, but alas, they do. The temptation of the prize, the temptation of that trinket is too much, too irresistible, the pleasure soon to be obtained. And so what is the consequence? Well, they're gobbled up by a 9-legged turtle fox that salivates extensively. This is what happens. We see it over and over again. But unlike the red-shirted fool, Israel's true prize was not a trinket, an idol, but living in a theocracy. That was the true prize for Israel. God as king, as he had established at the beginning, and that was the best life possible for Israel. Perfect relationship with God, with him as king. So today's passage brings us to a passive judge, to a passive deliverer, and Barak is his name, but there's lots to touch on before we get into Deborah and Barak and what transpires. There's extra context for us, and so to help us on our way, we're given some historical context. We see how far behind Israel is in terms of technology and power and whatnot. We can see that only God can rescue them. Only God can deliver them. Technology on the world stage at this time of the world, we read in verse 2 and 3, was advancing. And so it says, "So the Lord sold them into the hands of King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera, the commander of his army, was based in Harosheth Hagoyim because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They cried out to the Lord for help." They cried out. This is the time in the world, in the transition between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. And this step forward in this thing we call metallurgy is significant because it makes a huge difference in battle and conquest. And so there were places, there were civilizations that just would seem to disappear overnight, like the Hittite Empire. This chariot mention with iron is significant because, as I said, it shows Israel could not help themselves. Any army versing chariots fitted with iron and iron weapons was done for if they did not have the same. They were too much. And so Israel suffered the consequences of their idolatry and their disobedience by the oppression of Sisera. 20 years. But because God is good and a faithful father, he keeps his promises and he raises up a deliverer. And this deliverer is a bit of a passive one. a bit of a dud, we might say. A dud deliverer. There's some alliteration for you, dud deliverer. Deborah, however, is a prophetess of the Lord, not the deliverer we're talking about. She's leading Israel through this time by judging the community in terms of internal conflict as an elder or leader. She's called a judge in the passage. It could mean that she's a judge in the same likeness of the judges we see in the book of Judges, or that she is a judge in the terms of she's got a gavel and she is decreeing judgments when cases are brought to her in God's name. She can do both, I think, and the reasons for that is because Barak, this passive deliverer, is inactive and doesn't want to get involved. He doesn't want to step up. He's indecisive and uncommitted. And we have a few indications of this in the passage, and I want to talk to you about them. Firstly, Deborah in verse 6, if you've got it there, read on. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor." So the NIV misses some helpful phrasing here. The ESV phrases it differently. Rather than being a statement, it's a question. It says, "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you?" So we see two things from this phrasing. The first thing is that this is not the first time that Barak has been asked to do his job. It's not the first time he's been called to action. And Deborah reminds him that it is the Lord, the God of Israel, the God of his forefathers, who has called him to this action. He's saying, Barak, get moving. It's time. It's time to stand up and do what needs to be done. And the second thing is, Barak's passivity is quite comical. It's quite funny, in my opinion. But it's also a devastating indictment of the corporate heart of Israel at the time. In response to Deborah's reminder, Barak replies in verse 8, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you do not go, I will not go." I think that is absolutely ridiculous. My kids, my children, my beloved children, they, if they're ever unsure of something, if they're afraid, if they're concerned, they'll come up to me and say, "Hey, Pa, can you come with me? Can you help me?" Their uncertainty is taken away and disappears when they hold my hand and I walk along with them. Alternatively, they send me on ahead and I walk point for them and I cop 96 Nerf bullets to the face as I go around a corner. These things happen. But sometimes they just need a bit of a verbal nudge. They just need to be told that everything is going to be all right. You just need to do your job. I would say something like, "Charlotte, are you in your bedroom?" To which Charlotte would say, "No." And my response is, "Then why is your light on?" Barak needed both those corrections. He did not have faith that the God of Israel would do what he said he would do. He either didn't believe that Deborah's prophecy was true and right, that he wanted Deborah to put her money where her mouth was, or that he wanted to use Deborah as a token, like a Canaanite idol, and take her with him to ensure that he was going to have victory in his battle. "I'm only going if you come with me." God's words were not enough. He wanted something tangible, something to hold onto, a hand to clasp. And this is the challenge for us today. This is the challenge. When we read about Barak's character, are we looking for a token, for something to hold onto, a hand to hold, before we step out in faith for God's sake. As Christians, we live our lives in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. That is our objective. We've seen that in our series in Philippians. We embody the life-saving gospel. We shine Jesus, and we are the hope of the world. We shine Jesus. People have no purpose, no hope, and no future without him. And that is a scary truth. Have you waited for a sign or a trinket or some such thing before stepping out in faith for God? Have you missed opportunities to share Jesus because you have waited? When we wait and we wait and we wait and we wait, we miss the opportunity of the blessing of being used by God. That is the blessing. Is there any greater blessing than that? Any greater thing than being used by God? See, God can use anyone for his purposes, even those who are not his people. And we see this in the Judges cycle, don't we? We see that the Canaanites are used to correct Israel by oppressing them. And then they cry out to God and go, "Oh, God, we know we're doing the wrong thing. Please forgive us." And then everything gets back on track again. God is not hindered by the passivity of people. People's attitudes and behaviors and preference do not stop God from doing what he wants to do. God is unstoppable in that way. Nothing can stop him. Unfortunately for Barak, though, his passivity, his failure to respond to God's words, excluded him from the honor of being God's helper. Now, this is really important. I don't want you to miss this part. I want you to pay attention. Barak still did stuff. He was still active. He still showed up. He was a part of the battles. He was chasing down Canaanites. He gave. But because his heart was in the wrong place, he missed the blessing. Verse 9 says, Deborah informs Barak of his choicest consequences. Because of the course you are taking, she says, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. A woman. Jael. Jael means helper. Helper. Now some background here for this one, okay? Jael is the wife of this guy called Heber, and he's related to Moses' family by marriage, the Kenites, and Heber has defected to the Canaanites, the stronger people at the time. So he's like, he wants to hang around with the people that are winning. He doesn't want to lose. And so he's defected away. And Jael, apparently seeing or hearing about Israel's victory in this miraculous battle, she changes sides again. She's like a double agent, right? She's flipping all over the place. And she lures Sisera into her tent with the promise of sanctuary. The unfolding brutality of Sisera's death is, well, it doesn't leave much to the imagination. Jael kills him with a hammer and a tent peg. Not the way I would want to go, personally. It's pretty brutal. But the brutality of Sisera's death is obviously a punishment for his brutalizing of the Israelite nation. Jael was the instrument of this punishment. God used her for his purposes. Chapter 5, verse 24 to 27 say this. They give us an insight into God's blessing of Jael. Blessed of women, the wife of Heber. Blessed of tent-dwelling women. I feel like this is a bit of an I told you so from God. out of the Song of Deborah. This woman who was on the outer, she was flipping sides all over the place, not one of God's special people, is blessed to be God's helper. She's blessed. And in case you missed it, she killed Sisera, killed him dead. He died where he was, dead, with a crushed head. The repetition of Israelite poetry. The blessing is being used by God to be his helper as he works out his victory. It is God who has the victory. He sees to it that justice is done. Nothing stops God's justice. Nothing can stop God. Verse 23 gives us the phrase, curse Meroz. Curse its people bitterly because they did not come to the help of the Lord, to the help of the Lord against the mighty. Meroz is a grouping term for the Israelite nations that did not come to help in battle. Listed are Reuben, Gilead, Dan, and Asher. And there are those in Israel who heeded the call, but there are those who did not. And those that did not are said to be cursed by the angel of the Lord. That's pretty extreme, hey? They're God's people, right? They're God's people too, yet they receive a curse. Everything turned out okay though, didn't it? They won the battle. Yeah? It worked out. Does it matter if they didn't help themselves and partake in the plan? Can they enjoy the victory vicariously through the rest of Israel? Well, verse 16 and 17 help us here. They give us a look at the hearts of the tribes that we're talking about and the hearts of Barak as well. In the districts of Reuben, there was much searching of heart. Gilead stayed behind the Jordan. And Dan, why did he linger by the ships? Asher remained on the coast and stayed in his coves, searching of heart, lingering, remaining, and staying in the coves, sanctuary. In the lives of Barak and the unhelpful tribes, we see the consequences of passivity as God's people, and that is a curse. Sounds extreme. The curse is not being a partaker in the honor of the Lord, not receiving the blessing as being God's helper, whether it's for fear or for pride or if you're indifferent. The curse is of those who live passive lives, that they do not share in the blessing of being God's helper. They don't get to help God. That's the curse. So building on what we've learned about the character of Barak, there is a New Testament comparison to these tribes. There's a New Testament comparison to Barak and the tribes who did not help. And that's from the words of Jesus. And it's Matthew 25, 31 to 45. I'm going to paraphrase it for you. The Son of Man comes in his glory, and the angels are with him, and he's sitting on his throne, and he separates the people that are before him, some to the left and some to the right, as a shepherd does sheep and goats. He says to the ones on his right, "Come, you who are blessed, you are amazing. Take on your inheritance. The kingdom has been prepared for you. For when I was hungry and thirsty, when I was a stranger, when I needed clothes, you cared for me, you looked after me, you accepted me." Then the righteous ones, those on his right, will say, "When did we ever do that, God? When did we ever help you in those situations?" And God will say, "Truly I tell you, whenever you did this for one of the least of my brothers and sisters, you did them for me." Then, speaking to those on his left, he'll say, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was in need, and you did not help me. I was sick, and you did not visit me. I was in prison, and you did not look for me." They will answer the same. "God, when did we ever see you do those things?" When? And God will say, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for me." Chapter 5, verse 31 says this: "So may all your enemies perish, Lord, but may all who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength." Deborah means bee, like as in a buzzing bee. It means bee. She stung Barak into motion. So I can imagine the bee dance if you're getting stung into motion by someone like Deborah, a prophetess of the Lord with character, who's judging courtroom things. She would have a stern word. You would be cowering a bit, wouldn't you? I'm sure that she had a sharp tongue. Accordingly, I want to shake you up today. I want to shake you to the bone. Shake you. Because if you are living a life as a nominal Christian, you are missing out on the blessing of God. This is not good. This is not good for you. And I don't want that for you. The second application for tonight is this: loose yourself from passivity. Set yourself free from living a passive life as one of God's people. Do you want to change? Do you want to be passive? If you don't, if you want to strike out and be active as one of God's people, then my prayer for you is be loosed in the name of Jesus. Stand up, stand firm for him, because he is the only one worth standing up for. Jesus, God's Son, has risen. He is risen, and all his enemies, those who reject him, they will perish. People who do not have Jesus as King will perish. Their eternities are forfeit. Some of those people might be here today, unsure of their futures. But there are people outside of these walls who are unsure of their future. They need to know Jesus. They need him as King. They're your friends, your workmates, your schoolmates, your perfect strangers. They're the people who need Jesus. But for those who love Jesus, if you have said yes to Jesus, you'll be raised with him, strengthened with the hope that you will live an eternity with God as your Father, as one of his kids, with Jesus as King. And in the here and now, right here, the Holy Spirit is with you, strengthening you in every step that you take. What a blessing that is. Don't wait to become active. Don't wait to say yes to Jesus. Don't be like the red-shirted minion or the passive Israelites. Turn to Jesus. Say yes to Jesus. And receive the blessing of being his helper and being in his family. So my question for you, whom do you serve? Do you serve yourselves? Are you passive? Lauding in being passive? Resting on your laurels of religiosity or cultural family pedigree of Christianity? Just like the goats, just like the passive Israelites, just like the trinket-seeking minion? Or do you serve God, who is the one and only King, who brings freedom and justice and offers himself as a gift for eternity? Whom do you serve? I pray tonight you think deeply on this. Let me pray now.